users. And so using that rigorous criteria that's been developed in a very transparent way, we can easily establish which products are the high quality products that are indeed safe for contact with drinking water.
All right, all right. Now, moving on to Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies, do you see any differences in how you observe standardization and certification criteria in the United Kingdom and in the wider continent from what we see in India or North America?
Yeah, I mean, it's again, like Rick said, it's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be invited to the seminar and to be at the same level as Mr. Pant and Mr. Andrews, who are truly titans of the industry. Yeah, the UK is a little bit different. Most of the approvals that go through are under the RAS requirement or British Standard 6920 for materials. The standard is a lot less rigorous than the American standard, where we don't have the audit requirement or the annual retest. Most of the testing done for the UK market and wider non-certified Europe and the Middle East and Africa, it tends to be more the RAS and the basic scientific testing, which is a 5-year annual test without a site-based audit. So the testing is quite different. The setup is still very much the same. NSF co-wrote the standards, which us and RAS use because we have our own certification process as opposed to the RAS approvals process. And then obviously in 2009, it separated and we became 2 separate entities working on the same test code sheet requirements. But it's they're very similar, but the key differences are the retest requirements in the UK. The retests are every 5 years on mechanical and materials approvals.
So on average, do you see organizations or companies having certification in, say, with North American standards or East Asian standards? Do they find it easier to get, certification or standardization in the UK, or does it happen automatically, or do you have to jump through more hoops?
Yeah, you do have to jump through more hoops. So the testing doesn't directly relate. The mechanical testing is relatively similar, but they do have to retest with a approved test lab to do the exact test code requirements because there's different endurance requirements, etc. From the materials standpoint, the materials test in the UK has a very, which I'm sure many of your manufacturers would already know if they've ever tested, has a very strange requirement, which is an odor and flavor requirement, which is where 3 panelists have to physically taste and smell the water that comes off a product after testing's been completed. That requirement is very stringent compared to other wider European and North American requirements. So from a material standpoint, quite often the British requirement can trick and sort of catch a lot of people out, specifically that part, which is the odor and flavor requirement.
So is there an objective measure for that? Because it sounds a little subjective in nature.
But you're right. By the we have calibrated test technicians that conduct the testing. So we have hundreds of people come in, and then we narrow it down to sort of 10 or 20 people who are within the scope of taste and smell required for the standard, which is a calibrate requirement that goes through every year, which makes it slightly less subjective, but ultimately it is still a part of the test that can be subjective in nature because ultimately it's the view of 3 people then whether a taste or smell is identified within a product. So there is that level of potential risk.
All right. Now, I mean, moving on from this discussion, I would like to raise another point, which is around the differences between standards and certification process. Now, in India, we see there is a marked difference between standard developing bodies like BIS, but they are also involved in certificate granting. although a lot of the lab work is outsourced, while some of it is also done internally by them. Mr. Pant, now correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the BIS is deeply involved both in the standards drawing up and certification process in India. Do we see a similar strategy followed by other countries or other jurisdictions, or is it quite similar to what we have in India?
Okay. Thank you. I think
Yeah.
I required permission to be unmuted now. So I think a very, very valid question. BIS as a national standards body, we have one model as you talk. We have a standardization wing. We have separate deputy director general. It is a separate vertical, and we have 15 divisions. So one of them is civil engineering divisions, which is involved in all buildings and related construction activities, and therefore water supply, drainage, sanitation also. There are a few committees on, one is water fittings and sanitary appliances, another on plastic pipes, yet another on public health engineering. So all these fall under one civil engineering division. And there are similar more divisions. So these divisions and one activity, which is one vertical on standardization with separate head, is involved in standards formulation activity. And we have formulated more than 21,000 standards so far. And some of the standards are direct adoption of international standards also. This is less in case of civil engineering, where we have all indigenous standards. Incidentally, all indigenous standards of BIS are available for free download from BIS website. Also, that facility is available today. And on certification, there is a separate vertical on certification, product certification, where we have various schemes for product certification. One of the most popular schemes is of ISI mark or BIS standard marking, and under BIS product certification. And and it is spread all over the country, while standardization is at the BIS headquarters, New Delhi. Standardization, we have more than 35 branches and some 5 regional offices throughout the country, and this is altogether separately done. But then, of course, we do get feedback from our certification people, and we get inputs on the difficulties being faced in certification or suggestions otherwise, and some research carried out by our certification wing. The third, our vertical, is of laboratory. These laboratories are meant for our indigenous research and indigenous testing for all the BIS certification product, which may be against application for BIS certification or already licensed products, for which we have to lift the samples from the market of ISI marked good and test it in our laboratories, and or maybe from the factories during the course of our audits, and those are tested. And so these are somehow give feedback to each other. If we make good standard, these standards are implemented in certification. These are implemented in testing. Our laboratories, we have some 8 laboratory at different parts of the country, and then a central laboratory at Saibabad, Ghaziabad near New Delhi. Then, if to meet the requirement of ever-growing number of samples to be tested for variety of products, we approve outside laboratories also. So there is a scheme of approval of OSLs, outside laboratories also, which supplement the efforts of our laboratories to meet the demand of testing. And this testing feedback reports are as a feedback used for our grant of license, again for ISI mark, as well as for continuation of the existing license based on the performance. So to review the performance of the existing licenses. So that is the kind of structure we have followed. These verticals work independently, yet there is some connect in the form of feedback that we receive from each other. So this is the structure that we follow. Word over, of course, others will tell better. There are various ways. Some do standardization but not certification. There are number of parallel bodies doing standardization on the same subject also. For example, if you see in US, you will find there are bodies like Of course, UL in USA, UL is one, or NFPA is another one, and then you have API, ACI, and some of the bodies, on the same subject, even they make standards. So that is not the case here. But of course, one interesting thing is that we have in the country a scheme for standards developing organization also, SDOs. The other standard, which may not be a national standards body, NSB, because NSB is one which is defined under the Bureau of Indian Standards Act, and the position which has been given to BIS. But then there are other bodies also who can also and should also make standards, and those may be the industry standards, association standards. They may be followed by certain kind of people and the association and the industry to develop their own skills. And there is also a scheme where these standards formulated by SDOs can be adopted as Indian standards. So that scheme is also available. So far, there is no such standard has been adopted so far. But that scheme, we have opened up that scheme also. So this is the current status of standardization and its relation to certification and laboratory testing.
Thank you, Mr. Pant. Now, Mr. Davies, Mr. Andrew, do we see a similar structure in North America and Europe, or is it markedly different where standard drawing up bodies are completely independent and separate from the certifying authority, not just in terms of being placed in different silos, independent silos, but the bodies themselves not being permitted to operate in the same sphere?
Yeah, as Mr. Pant said, in the U.S., it's actually quite similar. There's, as he mentioned, there's sort of three silos of activity. One is the development of the standards, two is the testing, and three is the certification. And it's possible that certain entities can be active in one or two or all three of those segments of activity. NSF is actually active in all three. So we have a testing laboratory that performs testing to not only the NSF standards, but other standards as well. We have, of course, our standards development organization, which works again with a consensus group of experts from industry, from public health, users of products to develop the standards. And then, of course, we have our certification arm that uses test results generated by our laboratory group against the standards developed by our standards group to do the certification. And as Mr. Pant mentioned, there can be a number of different organizations active in the same sector, possibly developing similar standards that aren't totally overlapping, but maybe in the similar area. All of this activity in North America is coordinated by ANSI, American National Standards Institute, who are an accrediting body to check the laboratories for accreditation, to check the standards development activities to make sure they're being done correctly, and also checking the certification bodies to make sure that their certifications are being done correctly. So we have kind of a complex structure in North America, yet similar to the one that Mr. Pant described for India.
Mr. Davies, how is the structure in the UK? Is it similar again, or markedly different?
It is similar, but there are some differences. So in the UK, there's another layer. So the initial requirements are laid out in law as regulations by the Parliament, and then from there, then the requirements for the testing needs is laid out very similar. Then, so the test code requirements are held by independent water undertakers. So within the UK, there's several water undertakers that handle smaller area, Thames Water, for example. So we're part of their discussions then on changes of the test code requirements. They're laid out at that point, which is the test requirements, and then you have the approval / certification, for which there are multiple choices. NSF Reg 4 is our answer to it. There's also the RAS requirement, the RAS approval. So it's very similar, but there is this sort of upper level then where the requirements are laid out in law in the UK. and that's completely separate. So when that's discussed, we don't really have sort of a lobby group for labs that's involved in that part. The law hasn't changed since 1999, so I don't imagine that's going to change anytime soon. But ultimately, sort of that's the sort of upper level requirement that does have an influence then on the following two stages.
I see. Now, I understand that since structures are similar, there are two aspects to any standardization or certification process. You have to kind of achieve or tread a balance between the product testing and the process of parameter testing. So, I mean, what kind of weightage do you give to product testing or product certification against process testing and certification in the UK?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand your question. Would you mind repeating for me?
Okay, so for any standard, there are two aspects to the standard. One is with regards to the product, as in what the product is like, the end product, and the other is the process through which you arrive at that product. The manufacturing facility, the testing facility that you have internally with the manufacturer. So how does the UK balance out these two aspects of any certification?
So depending on it kind of depends on the approval. So RAS very much doesn't worry about the manufacturing facility. It's purely a product-based test requirement. So it's quality of the product against variable pressures or life cycle testing on a mechanical side. And then obviously, like I spoke about the material side, then it's non-metallics that pose potential risk to marketplace. And then NSF's interpretation of the same requirement as a full certification scheme. So then we go down the additional routes then of making sure the manufacturing facility has the quality systems in place to make sure we maintain that level of quality. And then we do the additional checks that way. So in the UK, it's kind of the balance depends on the certification or approval system. If you want to go down the approval system, it's very much product only, and there's very little overview of the manufacturing facility. And then if you go down the certification route, there's a mixture of the two then. So we still do the same test code requirements for the product assessment, but then we also conduct certification requirements. So we do the audits then to make sure they are in compliant with the regulation 4 and they can maintain that quality level. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Now, Mr. Andrew, is it again similar in the US, or is ANSI governing both the product parameter as well as the process parameters with standardization mechanisms?
Yes, great question. So the standards in North America are very much performance focused. So there's a test done. If the product passes the test, therefore it's in conformance to the standard and it's considered to be a good quality product that's acceptable. So where the process comes in is making sure that the manufacturing of that product doesn't change from when it was tested, that the same suppliers of raw materials are used, the same suppliers of any components that are purchased, and the same manufacturing process. So that's where the facility audit comes in as such an important part of the certification. So NSF will actually visit the facility unannounced. We just kind of show up, and the manufacturer has to let us in, which they love. Not really, but so we come in and we verify their supplier records to make sure they're still purchasing the same components, the same ingredients, the same materials, that their production process hasn't changed. And so it's really much a verification that the product will still meet that testing requirement if we were to test it again, verified through their process, if that makes sense.
So this actually seems quite similar to what we have here in India with the Bureau of Indian Standards, which it probably takes me to my follow-up question with Mr. Pant. Now, Mr. Pant, if we have so much commonality between the Indian way of doing things and the North American way, why is it not possible to use the same standards in the US and in India, so that, or at least there should be a simplified way to get licensed across different geographies?
Yeah, I think let me bring more clarity. Why every country has to have its own standards, and what's the importance of those standards, and difference between a prescriptive standards and performance standard. No? And then standards and certification. What becomes more important, standard and less important, certification. If you pass, final results. So first of all, let me tell you. See, the objective is a built facility. So good built facility, which is functional, which is efficient, which is sustainable, and whatever is required for that. One thing is you have to have a good quality product, because some 40% of the cost or inputs of a built facility is based on various kinds of building materials and products. One of them, of course, is your plumbing products. So ensuring this one component of products for efficient built facility requires the quality fit for use. Now, if you, for example, you say the timber shall be of, should be able to meet this much of load, it should not decay, and it should perform for so many years, this becomes performance. But then you say teak is one wood which meets this criteria, and you prescribe it should be teak. The matter ends. So now I think you would have understood better. So a commoner person would go and say, I would like to purchase teak. He would not say number of years of durability. He would not say anything performance. Sometimes prescription becomes more simplistic than performance. Sometimes performance becomes more convenient than prescription. And therefore, this fight has been going on for last 100 years. It will continue. It will never end. And more and more different types of products will require different types of combinations. 10% prescription, 90% performance, 20% prescription, 80% performance, or vice versa. So this is so we should not be worried too much on this account. But then we are slowly shifting from prescription to performance. For example, this is a table, and today's table, you do not know it is plywood, particle board, fiber board, Korean or lamination, which material, which lipping, which lag, which drawer, which and there would say let it perform. And then there are certain performance. Therefore, what happens? Based on the type of product, shift from prescription to performance. And it has to be decided case to case basis. That's number one. Number two, your fundamental first question on every standard is classified. Clause number 1, its scope. 2 references, 3 classification, 4 raw materials, 5 manufacture, 6 physical, chemical, and mechanical requirement, and 7 tests, 8 sampling and criteria conformity, 9 packing, and 10 marking. So these are the standard thing has to happen. If you can prescribe certain requirements without requiring a raw material requirements, it's fine. But in some case, you must also specify the raw material requirements or component requirements. In other cases, the performance is such that you may not require a requirement of the components or the raw materials. And final requirement is fine. But then similar happens in manufacture. For example, if you are manufacturing, say, fly ash based cement, you must know that there is something called fly ash also, and which should have this much quality, because the final product of the performance of the product may come after 10 years. When the structure is exposed to weather, you may not have today the performance test for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years duration. Then you go for the raw material requirements for fly ash to be used in cement, ultimately be used in concrete and structure. So it's so complex and so simple, easy also if you try to understand. So absolutely no issue. But if we go for certification, we see the manufacturing capability and capacity of the manufacturer, his quality control and quality assurance capability, and therefore if he is able to meet these requirements, and then he will be able to consistently make quality requirement, not by accident. And therefore these are some of those fundamental benchmarks and principles of standardization certification, and these are tweaked on case to case basis. I agree the shift is towards performance, and more we should go for performance-based specifications.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, carrying that analogy further, about performance and prescription. Normally, prescription is something that most Indians would tend to associate with a disease. Now, this disease is again something which signifies a problem. And the moment you start thinking of prescription and problem, then you're thinking of maybe addressing a problem instead of being proactive and making sure that your health is up to the mark, even so that you actually do not need to go for your more intrusive testing in a way. I hope that's the analogy that you're trying to draw up in a way, or maybe our certification would continue to progress in our country.
It's one view. Yeah, it's one view. Yeah.
Yeah, because see, not having any problems is always the optimal way to have things. I'm sure that is one thing which will be similar across geography.
It is like a modern modular furniture, and your carpenter-based joinery wooden furniture with high aesthetics looks. So how would you define the performance of looks?
True. That is very subjective in itself.
So I leave it at that. No, there are many examples which I would be able to cite to you. So and finally I do say that there is and there should be a continuous shift from prescription to performance.
Now we seem to be getting a few questions on social media. One that has come up just now is, if I have a BIS certification, can I export my product to other countries? That's a very pertinent question. I'm sure a lot of people have that question. Mr. Pant or perhaps Mr. Andrew, Mr. Davies, could you answer that?
Would you, Harsh, can I, as a manufacturer, like to answer it if it's okay with you?
Absolutely. Please go ahead, Mr. Gupta.
So first, I must thank Mr. Sanjay Pant for really giving full. We are manufacturers and we are rewriting the standard for BIS 8931. This question was asked by Mr. Sanjay Pant to me, that why can't we export our Indian products and why can't the other countries accept the BIS standard? Like India has now become the largest manufacturing hub for plumbing products. After China, India is the country. And there has been a lot of requirements for, so we have endeavored to make the standard that we are doing now is now very close to EN 200, and I will check with Andrew and Davis that we are NSF person is also on the panel of our 8931 standard NSF. We have shared our standard with them. It is under consideration, it is under wide circulation. We would want them to check and come back to us. Is it equivalent to RAS? So once we have the India is now a matured country and manufacturing is concerned, that we can be now at par with the international standards. And we can very well be, then once it is approved, then I don't know what the procedure would be. That can be, which Mr. Sanjay Pant will be able to help us. That how can we sort of standardize that, okay, fine, RAS and BIS standard now are at par, or we will have to get approval in the other countries for BIS. And or RAS, I was putting up a laboratory in India. I believe NSF has put up a laboratory in India, where they could also certify simultaneously for BIS and also for RAS. So same manufacturer does not have to go to various areas. What the question that people have asked is that, can we export BIS products? Yes, I personally feel if the standards are the same and similar or equivalent, and if the NSF laboratory or any other laboratory in India gives you both the RAS approval and a BIS approval, then you can export to all countries that you want to, wherever RAS is approved. So what do you, I think probably Andrew Davis can put some more light on it.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Gupta. Great points. And you're absolutely right. If we can achieve a harmonization on the standard side, then of course that standard will allow products that conform to be sold in multiple markets. And this has been a challenge for many years. I think on the mechanical side, it's a little bit easier to achieve some harmonization because you really have very similar issues regardless of the country that you're thinking about. You want valves to be durable. You want to make sure that the product will withstand pressure. You're worried about backflow prevention. These issues don't really change that much from one country to another. I think the biggest challenge is often on the material safety side, where, as Mr. Davis was mentioning earlier, we have the BS 6920 standard for the UK market, which is structured quite differently from the NSF 61 standard for the North American market. And this tends to be the biggest challenges on the material side. But I think there are many efforts to overcome these differences. There's an initiative in Europe to try to harmonize material safety requirements between the EU countries. The US and Canada have harmonized not only the mechanical requirements, but also the materials requirements, which actually took a long time, but at least we've achieved it between US and Canada. So there are some initiatives in this area to try to harmonize these standards. And maybe Mr. Davis has more input on this as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rick. Yeah, it's a really difficult game. You spoke, Mr. Gupta, about EN 200, which is a TAP requirement. So EN 200, the 2008 variation, is generally accepted as an equivalent for the RAS requirements mechanically, but it doesn't have the material requirements which RAS also needs. So even though mechanically your product then, if you have a recognized lab that's accredited to EN 200 and a test report, mechanically your product would comply, but the non-metallic materials wouldn't have then been tested against BS 6920, which is a legal requirement in the UK. So it becomes difficult then to say, yeah, that would be an equivalent to RAS. It would be, if you had EN 200, it would potentially be an equivalent to the mechanical only. So you could then say that the quality of your product mechanically is comparable, but then you would still have to possibly go through some additional testing then on the material side and then sort of marry those two together to get that approval. And then we could go down the route, which I'm sure Rick will talk about as well. Then we could go down the route maybe of certification, where we can then use the certification to show that you've got recognized BS EN 200 testing, or any EN 200, because they're generally universally the same. The 2008 variants, as well as the BS 6920, which would give you your Reg 4 compliance or your RAS approval, depending on which certification or approval you go down. So that there are ways, but it's a very long-winded process that takes a lot of sort of work and a lot of unification before we get to that stage. Like Rick talked about for the European approvals, the group is called the 4MSI, 4 member states initiatives, which is the Netherlands, Germany, France, and the UK. The rest of Europe then is kind of not in the group, but in theory will follow on once that's been unified, because the 3 biggest approval countries in the UK, which are widely recognized globally, is Germany, France, and the UK. So in answer to your question, yes, it's possible, but right now I don't think there's anything in place that could really provide the sort of coverage you're really looking for. But it is something that could be developed over time, especially if the Indian standard falls in line with the European requirement, and that European requirement has already been widely adopted in that marketplace.
All right. See, all of this discussion about harmonization in the end comes back to the kind of benefit that any manufacturer or producer would be able to extract from it. And one of the most important resources, of course, is time and cost, or resources are time and cost. So what kind of an easing up or a reduction would we expect if there was more harmonization across jurisdictions in drawing of standards and then certifying them? Say, for example, NSF, if I were to send a sample to them and ask NSF to conduct testing according to 3 different standards, and assuming there's a good overlap across the 3 standards, would there be a reduction in cost or time if I do that?
Yeah, I'll take this one. Thank you. There would be, the more harmonization can be achieved, the less different types of testing is required for different markets. So harmonization is a very good thing for speed to market, for cost to the manufacturer, and ultimately then, of course, that cost gets passed on to the end user. So it's great for end users too, if there is increased harmonization. The other point is the risk of failure. So as Mr. Davis pointed out earlier, the BS 6920 test has this odor and flavor component to it that for the North American standards isn't part of the consideration. So sometimes it can be difficult to find materials that meet both standards. So, it makes it more difficult for the manufacturer to sell the same product in different markets if it's hard to find materials that meet the criteria for both markets. So this is another benefit of harmonization, is it's easier to have a single product that can be sold in multiple markets without changing certain materials to meet one market or the other.
That's good. Now, given that you would like to avoid complaints, is there any form of a redressal mechanism for an aggrieved consumer for a product which is, say, NSF certified or certified by someone else? Or is it just a case of caveat emptor?
I'm sorry, could you repeat? I apologize.
Is there a redressal mechanism for the end consumer who's facing problems with an NSF certified product?
Yes. So if anyone has questions about an NSF certified product, they can, of course, contact NSF at any time. We have email addresses. We have forms on our website that can be filled out. They can call us by telephone, and we will check on any questions anyone has about NSF certified products anytime.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Mr. Davies. We have another question through our social media channels. A manufacturer is interested in exporting to the Middle East as well as to South Africa, and he's asking for the standard which would be involved, or the relevant standard that he needs to apply for and procure before he can start exporting to the Middle East and South Africa. Would any of you be familiar with these two geographies?
Do you want to take a Rick, or do you want me to?
Well, I'll start, and then maybe you can add a bit. So it in many ways it depends on the product. If it's a plumbing product, however, oftentimes the Middle East will accept either NSF certification or a RAS approval. So that's good news. Mr. Pont may also know about BIS approval. I'm not sure about that. And then for South Africa, they also will often accept NSF certification. I think probably RAS approval too, Lloyd, if you know. Yeah,
they do. Yeah, generally. The only part of the Middle East that's heavily NSF American requirements is Saudi Arabia. Yeah. But the rest of the Middle East generally accept both. You would have to check that specific country because it's not normally stipulated in their requirements. It's normally an advisory based on the engineers that work there. So some of these countries have heavily American engineers that work there, and then they tend to generally adopt the American standards. And others have traditionally had British engineers there, and then they've generally adopted the RAS requirements or the UK requirements. So, but Saudi Arabia is a key one because they don't generally accept RAS. They're more the North American part. But South Africa is the same. South Africa accepts both NSF and RAS, but it does depend on the product. You'd have to just check that exact product at the time, or you can reach out to us. We do generally know which one is generally considered acceptable.
I mean, too. So sum this up rather, in a nutshell, it really depends on what your consumer wants to buy. So as an answer, please check with your consumer which standard works best for them. There's no point in asking anyone but the buyer about what might just work from them, and then maybe price your products accordingly.
Like I say, generally they accept it, but yeah, ultimately it is very much the individual engineer in those countries will say, no, I would prefer a RAS approved product, or no, I would prefer an NSF 61 certified product for the quality of the water going through.
Yeah, sometimes the regulations are not super specific, so it comes down to the engineering specifications for a certain project at times.
Okay. All right. We have another, well, it's not really a question, but an observation, which I guess is around communication made by, the certifying or the standardizing bodies. As in, this is from Mr. Larry, and I hope I'm getting this correct. This covers the awareness of any certification or standardization to the end user buying certified products. And if it is not available, it does not benefit the manufacturer. Well, I guess what this means to say is that if there isn't adequate messaging around a standard or a certificate, then the end consumer, if he doesn't know about it, then it probably is a waste on the manufacturer's part to apply for it. I mean, a case in point would be something like the N95 mask. Everyone seems to be aware of N95 mask, but most people don't understand what that means. So is there some way to maybe communicate this to the end consumer, or the benefits of any standard or certification process? I know for a fact that BIS in India does that quite proactively. In fact, pretty much everyone in India knows about their hallmarking of gold and other products too. They keep advertising about buying ISI or BIS marked products. Do you come up with similar communications in North America, Europe, or maybe Africa?
Yeah, thank you. This is actually a big topic of discussion among our team at NSF now, is how can we better educate the end consumers about what the certification means? Because you're right, it's very confusing for end consumers to understand the significance of it, what it means, what it doesn't mean. So this is something we recognize, and in the coming months and years, it's going to be a big initiative for NSF to become more proactive to help end users understand the significance of the certification, the standards, and what does it mean for them specifically when they have a product that meets those standards. Great point.
In the UK market, it's a little different. Most products are fitted by a qualified plumber, and part of the plumber's training is to know that all products need to comply with Regulation 4 1999. So they then know that the only way you can show compliance, because the plumber is legally held responsible if they fit an inadequate product, they know the only way you can really show it is through certification or approval. So we tend to have a lot more adoption of the RAS or the NSF Reg 4 certification in the UK through those sort of those industries. So the plumbing authorized bodies do training on it, the unions do training on it, and it's part of the general university or college qualifications to know what the requirements are and know how to show it. So I'd say probably 80% of the products sold into the UK go through that market. They don't go straight to the end user. So we get a lot better sort of understanding and adoption of the standard here in the UK, but we still have an issue with it for the end user. So if you go into a large plumbing store yourself, that there are so many standards in the UK, like EN 200, but also RAS, and they'll be marked on the product and on the box, and an end user doesn't really know the difference between the two.
Understood. So we've been talking a lot about the BIS, RAS, and ANSI certifications. Are there any other major standardization or certification bodies that we might have missed on, but ones which are globally used or very widely used across the world? Maybe something like an ISO standardization. We haven't talked much about ISO actually.
Yeah, in the area of water, ISO hasn't been super active because, as Mr. Ponce said earlier, so many different countries have their own already established standards, which, kind of gain a lot of traction and become difficult to evolve and must be evolved usually slowly over time so the manufacturers can implement them. But, one other note here is that China does have a lot of regulations for products manufactured and sold in China that, of course, are controlled by Chinese standards development organizations and sometimes by the Chinese government. So China is typically a fairly regulated market for many types of products, and they do have often their own standards for products and their own government approvals.
I see.
Yeah,
I guess
in
that,
Europe. Sorry, Mr. Hart.
please go on, Mr. Davis. No, Mr. Davis, please go on. I'd like to hear your take on that first.
Thank you. Yeah, so in Europe, like I mentioned previously, there are three main approval standards, which is DVGW in Germany, ACS in France, and then the RAS or the NSF Reg 4 in the UK. All three of those are universally adopted in several countries, but those three are the sort of the main ones in Europe and are used in quite a lot of Europe. So if you have ACS or if you have RAS, for example, RAS is widely used in Eastern Europe as an approval standard to show quality on your valve, even though there's no specific requirement. It's the same with the DVGW and the French requirements, the ACS. So yeah, those are the three main bodies. But like Rick said, there are some really out there ones, like Singapore has their own requirement loosely based on BS 6920. The variation between the two is they're very similar, but the extraction materials has a slightly different requirement. What you check for is different because our lab tests for both. So there are some sort of awkward out there standards that cover a huge area and a large amount of people, but only really are applicable to that country. But the North American requirements, the UK requirements are widely adopted across most uncertified countries or countries with certification not specific to that plumbing sector.
Yeah, one other one to note would be Japan. They have the Japan Industrial Standards or JIS standards for many types of products as well for the Japan market.
Okay. All right. Quite a few standards to remember about, just think about. So as we kind of discussed earlier, always ask your consumer and then take it from there. We have another question on our feeds. This is from Matthew from Bradford White, and he wants to know if he has a UL, IEC, and NSF certification on his products. Can he sell the products in India? Well, Matthew, now you're putting me on a difficult, tricky wicket here, because the topic today is importance of product approval and certification for the Indian manufacturers. But I guess I will entertain that in the spirit of cooperative competition. Yeah. So hopefully someone can answer that question. If he has IEC, UL, and NSF certification on his products, can he sell in India?
I think I would like to say something,
Yeah.
If it's permitted.
Please, Mr. Paul.
Yeah. See, in India, all certification is free. You can take certification from all bodies. As you, depending on the your client. If the client has faith in one kind of certification compared to another kind of certification, it all depends on that. So therefore, but then if it is under mandatory certification, like cement or structural steel or steel reinforcement or baby food or baby milk powder or thermometer or electrical appliances, which are under mandatory certification, anybody, whether in India or abroad, who manufactures these products and wants Indian consumers to utilize them, the safety remains the same. So therefore, they have to go for BIS certification. For other parts, it may not be mandatory, but there are other legislations like the state public health engineering departments or other departments may require BIS certified product in preference to any other certificate. So we have to comply with that particular requirement. Otherwise, normally all kind of certifications are available, and that puts a pressure on BIS to keep on harmonizing our standards, upgrading our standards, and so that our standards should be able to meet the indigenous requirement, the quality, the raw material which is available here, readily available, how to effectively utilize the same. For example, I'll give you one example, which will make it very clear. we have standard specification for cement, for example. Now, in India, the kind of limestone which is available, which is for manufacture of cement, has got a higher magnesia content. So lower magnesia is good for cement and it is used worldwide. But if in India, we restrict to that particular lower magnesia, large amount of limestone would remain unutilized. And therefore, in separate Indian standards for that requirement is must. And therefore, we followed, and subsequently others also experimented. They also followed worldwide. So it is, we have to see, therefore, under each requirement, what is good for India, for our customers and our manufacturers. And therefore, we may take the international standard as a base, but then we have to deviate, and we have to assign reasons wherever we want to deviate in the interest of Indian manufacturers and users. So this is my understanding of standardization.
It's pretty clear to me actually where you're coming from there, Mr. Pant. And on that line, I have another question. I guess I can answer this. This is again from Mr. Lahiri. And he wants to know, why can the BIS not make lead-free valves mandatory in India? Now, Mr. Lahiri, I'm sure that the BIS is concerned about using lead-free products. And if proper representation is submitted, if they're not already being formulated, then they probably will start or think about working on it. Now, Mr. Pant, if you have anything to add there about why BIS is not making it mandatory for lead-free valves used in India.
It is normally not BIS who makes standards mandatory. Actually, it is by the concerned parent ministries. There may be some ministry who is charged with the responsibility to one kind of segment of industry, and therefore those are the ministries and their departments who really make these standards mandatory. But as far as lead-free is concerned, and so it may happen that someday some ministry or government may feel that it is required to make a particular set of standards mandatory. As I cited, there are large number of standards already there which are under MET certification. As far as lead-free these valves are there, forged brass valve is the one example, IS 13114, and there are large number of licenses are already there, which is lead-free. So it is also for the users. There are certain valves which are not exclusively for drinking water, and for other kinds of fluid also, like IS 778. So that need not be mandatory. So we have to decide, it's not like a fashion that we keep on deciding on making things, free of certain things, but we have to see the kind of applications it serves. And as far as it is potable water, 13114 has been lead-free sort of a valve, forged brass valve, and 778 where other fluids are also permitted to be used, and therefore it's not lead-free. So as far as standard is concerned, but on making mandatory, there are other bodies and the Government of India and its various wings who make the standards, the certification of a standard mandatory or compliance of the standard, the products against relevant standards mandatory. So that is the kind of response I would like to share.
And I guess for any standard, when it is being drawn up, the local aspects or considerations also need to be taken into account, right?
Yes.
For example, in India, if you talk about lead-free products, sometimes the water itself will have contaminants in the form of iron or even arsenic. So just having a product which is lead-free is kind of pointless in that case. We have another question from a Mr. Dubey, who again, it is related to Indian standard. Now, Mr. Pant, we are definitely going to keep you on your toes, it seems. Although we want to talk about how Indian manufacturers can export more, we seem to be getting a lot of questions on ISI standard itself. This one is on CPVC products, plumbing products. The question is, we have a standard on CPVC pipes in India, but no standard on fittings, CPVC fittings in India. Now, why is that?
Okay.
Now, so
yes, please.
I frankly know the answer to that one, sir, but I'd still like you to answer.
Now you can continue.
Okay. Now I would like to respond that the fitting, the draft standard has already been published for the fittings, And since if we don't have one now, it will be finalized quite soon as the committee which is drafting the standard agrees on the final layout of the standard.
Yeah.
So
This
if we don't
draft
have one now,
standard,
it will come out shortly.
Yeah, the draft standard is finalized. It is going to be out very shortly.
Now, if we have any questions on exporting Indian products to other geographies, I'd be keener to take that. Okay, I guess we have run out of questions, other questions now. So as just a second, I have a couple of other questions. Please give me a minute while I look that up. Well, these are more observations rather than questions. So if you have a pointed question, please ask that. Otherwise, I will move on to closing remarks and a closing question that I have. Again, related specifically to how Indian manufacturers can export more or find it easier to export. And this is directed more towards Mr. Andrew and Ms. Davies. First Japan and then China have become manufacturing powerhouses and factories to the world. These countries sell their products and services globally in jurisdictions with challenging certification requirements. What have they done so correctly that we in India should take note of and perhaps emulate to some extent in our own unique way?
That's a great question. Thank you so much. So one thing that the Chinese and Japanese manufacturers have done is they have learned the North American and the European requirements, the standards, the approvals. They have actually participated in NSF standards development. So we have had people from both Japan and China participate in development of the NSF standards through our consensus process. So they have become very, very involved, very, very knowledgeable. And so when they're designing and manufacturing their products, they are well aware of the requirements for North America and for Europe. So I would recommend that any Indian manufacturers interested in exporting their products start to really educate themselves on the requirements, the standards, the regulations for whatever end markets they're targeting, whether it's North America or whether it's the UK or Europe. And maybe Mr. Davis has more to add on this.
I don't know how to follow from that. I'm not. It's like Rick said, they're very knowledgeable and very sort of tuned into it. I have conversations with clients over 2-3 years where we discuss the standards. They want to understand it. We go through multiple conversations, and then they develop a complete new range for the European market outside of their domestic market, which is something that's really benefited them. And then we get a lot less failures as it goes through, because they've already done internal tests to the requirement. They've purchased the standards, and then they've developed from the ground up for that market. So for Europe, for example, and that seems to benefit them quite well. But I think it's perfectly, you're perfectly able to do the same thing or to adapt. But it tends to be more for the Chinese market especially, they tend to adopt more of an internal requirement and then a separate export requirement. So their products are often quite different between the two. And they do spend quite a lot of time reading and developing for those standards.
All right. We have one final question from Mr. Gupta, and this one is directed specifically at NSF. When are you guys planning on opening up your lab in India? And can we get WRAS certification through that lab?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Gupta, for that question. We're still considering the exact timing of the opening of the lab, as well as exactly the scope of testing that we'll conduct there. It's a rather significant investment. We want to make sure that what we're launching is going to fit the needs of the local market. It's very important to us. And so we really welcome the opportunity to cooperate with IPSC and to participate in events such as this one to help us really make sure that what we're developing for our efforts in India is fitting with the market needs. So yes, thank you everyone for allowing us to be part of this learning experience here today. It's very helpful for us.
Hopefully, when you've opened up your lab in India, the cost to Indian manufacturers will come down a little from what it costs right now to get our products certified through your European or American labs.
Yes, that's one of the big focuses, and one of the advantages of having a laboratory in India is we can help the costs be better in line with the Indian market by having that local resource. Absolutely.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear, Mr. Andrew. Now, if we have any closing remarks from anyone or observations.
Harsh, I would just like to add to what Mr. Richard said. The whole idea of putting up a lab in India was to even test for BIS certification and to do as per the requirement of BIS. So that would probably offset the cost of operations in India. And as I said, India is now becoming a manufacturing hub. I'm sure a lot of manufacturers would be interested in getting the approval for RAS and even NSF when the lab is in India. Just a remark, I just wanted to probably add to the business scope for NSF.
Thank you.
Well, so look for domestic standards too. That is good to hear. Now, I'd like to conclude this meeting. This has been a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much, Mr. Pant, Mr. Andrew, Mr. Davies. We've really learned a lot from this panel today. We look forward to interacting more with you in the future. And the reason why this discussion was so important is because we intend to achieve the objective of an Atmanirbhar Bharat, Make in India, which was announced by our Prime Minister. And these programs and other allied programs, they necessitate that we produce goods and services in India, which are not just used, but appreciated across the world. Now, value branded products and services are everywhere. And while it is important to present a unique offering to the consumer should be able to integrate the product in their existing lifestyle safely and reliably. And we look forward to organizations like BIS and NSF to enable the manufacturers to reach out to the value objective or the value-oriented consumer and make sure that they walk away happy from any transaction that is conducted. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Colonel Chadda, any remarks from you?
Yes, Mr. Harsh. It's a matter of great delight to have this session today, chaired by Mr. Harsh Agarwal. And also we had esteemed panelists like Mr. Sanjay Pant, Lloyd, and Rick from international arenas. And it has been a very useful, very practical discussion. And we all who were listening to it have benefited in a big way, especially with the aspects how certification is done, how testing is done, how standards are written. This is a great task which all the organizations have done, and now our BSI is doing in a big way. I compliment each one of you for your contribution to this session, and we are delighted. And in the end, I will request Dr. R.K. Somani, would you like to say a few words, sir, to all of us of your experience in the field of plumbing in a big way? And you've been closely involved with certification, standardization, and testing also. And performance of your products are internationally known. So may I have some words from you, Mr. Somani?
Thank you very much for requesting me to make some remarks. Mr. Pant knows the amount of time and effort I put in BIS.
Yes, sir.
I'm perhaps the oldest member on the BIS 2556 committee with 58 years as a member. And talking about updating, on the 23rd and 24th of March, our standards for sanitary ware and low flow fixtures will be finalized. BIS also asked me to chair the ISO 31600 meeting, which I'm doing. And we had one about 3 weeks ago. There also we have finalized the ISO certification for sanitary ware fittings. What we have done is although ISO is known as International Standards Organization, it is impossible to have one standard across the world because the requirements of each country is different. So what I proposed in Singapore when we had 2 years ago a meeting was that you have an ISO standard, but you got to accommodate all countries. So you have a system where the country can upload its own certification system and the products they wish to certify in a manner that BIS works. So they've agreed to that principle. So hopefully by end of March and next financial year, we should have our IS 2556 sanitary ware products and fittings printed and required to be fulfilled by Mr. Pant will know that I am the first manufacturer to get a license for the British China's sanitary ware. And for NSF, we have your certificate for our CPVC and PVC pipes and UPVC pipes. Within 2 years of operation, we were able to get this. And CII Green Pro certificate for the complete plant and products is also available. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Dr. R.K. Somani, for your words of wisdom. And thank you all the panelists and the moderator, Mr. Harsh Agarwal. We are indeed grateful to you for having come and joined the session with IPSC and FICCI. And it has been a great learning for all of us. God bless you all. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you from BIS.
Thank you.
Thank you for all of you for inviting us. I endorse completely what Dr. Somani has said. We are grateful to him for his continued blessing. He is leading from the front still. We are grateful and I look forward to his blessings, sir. Thank you.
Thank you,
Vinay
Mr.
Gupta.
Pant. Thank you, Mr. Pant.
Thank you, Vinay Gupta ji, for inviting.
All the best. God bless you all.
Thank you everyone for joining in.
Thank you. Bye.